we're experiencing a moment where God is answering prayer in real time in our ministry. We're in the midst of several seasons and signs and times and cycles. We've embarked on a 49 Sabbath cycle of being able to increase our presence in every aspect by sevenfold. It's an extraordinary time that we're in. And what I'd like to do is to bring Canaan forefront. I believe the reason why we've reached this plateau is that I had to open a spiritual gate. On Saturday, I talked about the dimensions of time and space where we measure our beings and our presence, even with such dimensions as age. And I pointed out that the universe that has been viewed by a large number of people built mega telescopes that can actually look and detect light that left a star over 1 million years ago. Now, what I want to be able to further state is that having that understanding of what God is doing is that we have opened by my saying, I accept and I lovingly accept the fact that God said that Canaan shall be a slave in America and Europe and in Spain to Japheth and to Shem. That's to the white man and to the Jew. And I accepted it lovingly, though it was brutal. I accepted it. And as a result of that, it opened up a space to go in and to see something else. Because as long as my mind was closed to the Bible truth about Canaan being a slave, if I left that door closed, it would also prevent me from saying or knowing the things that I'm saying now. I would just be ignorant. But once I accepted God's word, it opened up a vista, a window, and a door for me to see other biblical truths. And so Genesis 9:25 through 27 is very important. But I want to focus on Canaan for a while, because initially he was one of the baddest, to use a modern vernacular term, one of the baddest boys on the planet for a while. The only body that was more awesome than him was his father Ham in Egypt. Canaan. God called Canaan land flowing with milk and honey. He was a builder. He was mighty. He was organized. He was sophisticated. Canaan. Now he's going to be a slave, or he'll be taken from Egypt, from Africa as a slave. God only knows what he's become now. But I want to focus on the numerous times in the Bible that Moses writes and calls Canaan's name. And then we're going to focus on the fact that he never calls Japheth's name at all, except for the time or two when he talks about Noah. But he called Canaan's name all the time, even more than he called Ham's name. Let's go to the Bible, right? Let's go to Genesis chapter 11 first. Genesis chapter 11. Well, actually, we can start at Genesis chapter 10 and verse 15. And it says, and Canaan begot Zidon, his firstborn, and Heth. All right. Genesis chapter 11, verse 31. Then Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarah, his wife, and his daughter-in-law, and Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. All right. We see that again, Canaan. Let's look at Genesis chapter 12, verse 5. Haran, verse 5, let me read the beginning of it. And Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gathered, in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. Into the land of Canaan they came. All right. So we see that. And then, of course, in verse 6, and Abram passed through the land, the place of the Shechem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was in the land. All right, look at that. Look at now Genesis chapter 13, verse 7. Now what we're doing is that we are pointing up the number of times Canaan gets mentioned. I want you to tell me, and he's going to become a slave. Anybody ought to be proud to be a slave in America. If Canaan is your father, you ought to be proud of this man. You ought to be proud of the prophecy of slavery. I'll talk more about that also. But look at me, Japheth don't get no mention whatsoever. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled there in the land. All right, look at verse 12. And Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan. All right, look at, let's see now, that was 13. Look at chapter 16, verse 3. And Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram, and had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. All right, so we're just pointing out how often Canaan's name gets called. Look at chapter 17, verse 8. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan. You see, I mean, you're running around here talking about you don't like, you don't believe, you don't want to hear it. Some wrote me some nasty letters, say I must be out of my you-know-what kind of a mind. And he used every ugly expletive that he could, saying, why you want to be a son associated with Canaan? But look at Genesis chapter 23. Let's go to 23, verse 2, talking about this Canaan. And Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, the same as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. All right? And then look at Genesis chapter 24, verse 37. And my master made me swear, saying, thou shalt not take a wife to my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, whose land I dwell. I mean, it's just all over. Let's go to chapter 42 real quick, right? Get way back up in the Bible. Chapter 42, verse 5. And the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. I mean, we ought, people are running around calling themselves, Jews like the Israelites, or calling themselves African Americans or black, or we ought to be proud to be a son of Ham and Canaan our brother, or even a son of Canaan. This is a proud heritage. He is the most talked about. His land is the most talked about. He's the most talked about man in the Bible. We get Moses, so we know who Moses is, but Canaan, we ought to be delighted. So God said he's going to be a slave. All right, we made it through that. It was the wisdom of God that gave that prophecy, not the wrath of God, but the wisdom. Well, there was some wrath associated. Let me say that because Noah was angry with Ham for what he did. But that having been said, so-called black people ought to be proud of Canaan. And they ought to be throwing flowers at the Japheth and Shemite for bringing them to America. I mean, there's a movie that was posted up 30 years ago with Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall and some others, Coming to America. And there's been a sequel of it, of recent. I've quoted some observation of it, but there's another observation that I, feign to say because it brings a lot of angst. But here is allegedly this great kingdom in Africa called Zamunda, right? And Eddie Murphy is allegedly the priest of the king of Zamunda. And this is a place of extraordinary wealth and beauty and power. Extraordinary. Extraordinary. They're in Africa. Now, it really doesn't exist. It's fictitious characterizations. But when the prince of Zamunda wanted a wife, he came to America. That was the whole thing, but to come into America. He came to America to find a wife, not there in Zamunda. But he came to the place where the Africans were once slaves. It's where he came to find his wife. I mean, the profundity of that, every time I see that movie or think about it, Eddie Murphy must have some other secret political, philosophical ideas he's never expressed. And I keep picking up on them. We ought to be proud that God brought us here as slaves. We ought to be proud of our heritage. The Jews are proud and thankful to God that they were slaves in Egypt. And then God gave them Canaan land. Suppose God decides to do a double dip. Let's say the Jews were slaves and they acknowledge it. They don't fight it. They don't go over there and throwing ugly epithets at the Egyptians today because they were slaves. They don't do nothing like that. They don't even talk about it. But God gave them Canaan land for being slaves in Ham's land. Suppose God decides to do a double dip and give the Canaanites here in America Japheth and Shemite land. Can I share this with you without any malice or a sense of prejudice or bias? New York is a heavy Jewish enclave, right? Harlem became the great community it became starting in the 20s or 30s or 40s and by the 40s and the 50s. It was the joint. Harlem was the joint. I mean, Josephine Baker, left here and went to Paris, but Parisians came to Harlem because it was the joint. You want entertainment, you want some saxophone, you want to see some dancing, you want to eat some good food, you want to have some good times, come to Harlem. In the 40s and the 50s, come to Harlem. I'm going uptown to Harlem. But it was mainly Jewish money and influence, right? Let me ask you a question, Elder Smith. Would it be potential that God would now, as he gave Canaan land to the enslaved Jews, that God would give the Canaanites here in America ATLAH for the once enslaved Canaanites? Is that possible to think along those lines? I don't even know if most people's hearts are open to hear that. They just want to keep on following people like Jesse Jackson or Martin King or whoever, who the hell ever. And they just say they're never going to hear anything like this. But it don't matter to God. I tell you, that don't matter to him at all. But is it possible that we could inherit this land where we were once slaves, the same way the Jews inherited the land flowing with milk? And God has called the land ATLAH. Is the prophecy real, or is man just blowing smoke? It's a question we ought to ask. Now, everybody's not going to hear this. This message is not for everybody. If there were 10,000 people listening right now, that know that they're probably not. Maybe only 10 of them will actually hear this message. People are so churchified, so racist, so religious without God. This Jeremiah stood out in front of the temple of God that Solomon built and told them God wasn't in there. Y'all been going there for years, but God ain't been there for years. They kept going in there because they were religious. Same way they go to Joel Osteen or Brooklyn Tab or Hillsong. They keep going, but God ain't there. This message, and if you're hearing this message and it's sparking a fire in your heart, then you ought to praise God. You ought to give God the praise that he has allowed you to be one of the chosen ones to hear, to have ears to hear. Which one of those Psalms? Was it Psalm 135? We're reading Psalm 137 today. I think it's Psalm 135 where it says that we should ears to hear. What, y'all don't remember, huh? Okay, well, you should have remembered the Psalms that we're writing. Which one was it? And I got to get out of here today. Let me, I'm trying to find it. I'm too far over now. Wait a minute. Well, God says, he that have ears to hear. It must be 135. Oh, my goodness. Mm-hmm. 135:17, is that it? Yeah, there you go. Thank you very much. Actually starts at verse 16. 135:16. They have mouths, but they speak not. Eyes have they, but they see not. 17. They have ears, but they hear not. Neither is there any breath in their mouths. Listen. Let me say this to you. I raised the question rhetorically. God is speaking. I wanted you to agree. Is God speaking at this time? And we're hearing answer prayer in real time. But I also want you to be clear that there are people that are listening to me right now, and it is not going to move them. It's not going to move their racism. It's not going to remove their love for that demon, that fake president. They're not going to be moved by it. Even though they have ears to hear, they're not going to hear. They have eyes, they're not going to see. That's going to happen. But if you hear, this will change your life. This teaching will change your existence. As I said before earlier, Mother Whitaker, going back 13 years ago with the birth of those 4 girls. And now the word of God coming through is clear and powerful, anything that can be clear and powerful. We're living in a moment now where we're watching prayer answered in real time. This is symbolic. It's where Jesus was baptized. It's where John baptized. And so this is not a rebaptism. It's just a symbolic, if you will, act of what we're going to do, being in the water at the place where Jesus was baptized. And what I'd like to do is to baptize today that we would come to terms with the understanding of what God is calling for in righteousness. He's not calling for prosperity. He isn't calling for culturalism. God is calling for righteousness. If we would commit ourselves to fulfill all righteousness. And God has calls us to be persecuted for righteousness' sake, as John was persecuted for righteousness, and so Jesus. I got to tell you that I'll never forget this experience of actually stepping in the water where Jesus were baptized, and where John has baptized so many people. This is such a historic and a powerful, powerful sight. Just to touch the water was so critical. And I'm glad that people got baptized to have that experience. It was a safe experience and a great experience. I'm not even going to change my clothes. I want to just stay in baptism mode until I get back to the hotel. So that's what I want to say. All right.
This has been live from the Jordan River. God bless you all. Peace.
Righteousness. Boom, chakalaka goes right there.
My mother started liking the school and let me come here every single year. It has been 5 years and now I'm in the 7th grade. I still love this school. It has taught me a lot of things about the world and all around it, and let me see things I've never seen before, like me participating in the history fair last year. I would like to give thanks to all my classmates for making me feel comfortable and at home here. Please, to all the new and old parents in the school, don't take your kids out of the school because it will probably be the biggest mistake you've ever made. No matter what type of child you have, this school will shape it into a world's leader. So do yourselves a favor. Oh my goodness. Okay. So do yourselves a favor and keep your kids here till they graduate, and it will change yours and your child's life. Peace and blessings.
Over the years, we have served more than 1 million meals to hungry bellies and hungry people here in the Harlem community. And I wanted you to be able to see that. I want you to see our involvement with youth, our summer youth programs, our courtyard being used as a place where children can be safe, guarded, and protected as they have their miniature swimming pools. And a safe place for children to eat that is guarded, that is protected by our own sense of security, and the wholesome and fresh meals that we serve. We wanted you to be able to see the mission of this church. And we've been doing this for years. Just recently, one of our members, more than a 30-year member of this church, but it hasn't, not one that that you would probably find as members of some other churches with their nose stuck up in the air. But her father is now close to death or very sick in the state of South Carolina. And I said to her, because she doesn't have money, I said, we will buy you a bus ticket, a round trip bus or train ticket for you to travel to South Carolina to be with your father in this time of pandemic. There's very little funding around. There's sickness everywhere. And the thing that just blew me away was she said, as she was talking to Elizabeth, she said, but how are you going to do that, to pay for me a round trip ticket to travel and give me expense money? And because Pastor Manning has to feed the children, he has to educate the children, he has to buy school supplies for them. He has to pick them up in the mornings and take them back. And then he's got the ministry he has to take care of, all the bills of running the church, of keeping a major house like our house operational, keep the lights on, how are you going to be able to do that? And she was almost reluctant to take the money because she felt that it would be better served by feeding the children. We gave it to her anyway. But we want you to know that we do a work in this community. There have been a lot of lies told on us. And it's almost unimaginable why some of the people that have lied on us. But I can tell you behind all of it is the LGBTQ community. Hallelujah. They don't want us to be successful, but we are, and we're going to continue to be successful in serving the meals that we're serving and serving the people that we are. And the LGBTQ community will not take us down. They are not going to take our church. Yet they have defamed us. They've written ugly newspaper articles about us. They've marched against us. They've done a whole lot of ugly things. But you see what we have done, and that's not even the half of our service to children and to the needy in terms of our homeless shelters and the things that we've done over the years. And we will continue. And probably the lies and the smears and the ugly newspaper articles and the wicked spirits and the so-called I ain't for the black man, that is not going to go away. I don't expect it to go away. I don't. But I do tell you this, that we will succeed against all of that, for God is with us, and I am his servant.